Hello, this is Wmpyr. Here to talk to you guys about something fairly complex. It all is going to go back to, or it's going to start with this right here, which is the Kung Fu spear. So, in Chinese martial arts, my understanding, I'm not an expert in Kung Fu, but um, from from my understanding and little bits and pieces of research I've done over the years, the spear is the number one weapon in Chinese martial arts. And that's interesting because like when you think of like warfare, I've said to you guys that it's kind of silly trying to figure out what's the best weapon because if you look at the like for example modern military today, they have tanks, the Abram tank, they have the Apache helicopter, they have the F-16 fighter jets and stuff. What's the best? Well, we have them all. Why limit yourself to just one? And each one has their pros and cons, and they have their place, and it's actually a symphony of using them all together in the right way is what's going to win the war. So to say that one weapon is by far like the best or whatever is a weird point of view. But I feel like in the Chinese martial arts they've made it very clear that the spear is number one. And they got buttloads of weapons, and for them to come up with a spear, it's very interesting. And like when we go to like Captain Fairbairn, whom I'm a huge fan of, I've been studying him, um, for a long time now. He also appreciated the Chinese uh, spear, and I believe he was trying to do some research, so that they were doing like um, fighting with a stick. It was more like a staff, is my understanding. And there was a tournament, and in it, the uh, the guys, the Chinese martial artists that practice with the staff, which is what is that? That is like in Escrima, we practice with the sticks, but that's really a representation of a one-handed sword. Um, so in this case, the Chinese martial artists using poles and staffs, it's really a representative of the spear. And these guys came and wiped the competition, and I believe it had a very strong influence to Captain Fairbairn, and he was very impressed by it. And there's been documentations about that. Uh, so then I think there's no coincidence that later on this some of this was put into the bayonet fighting. And later on, from Captain Fairbairn to now, we're talking about Colonel Applegate, where for like the U.S. Marine Corps, I believe there is a connection from starting with Captain Fairbairn, and then now we're talking about bayonet fighting, and they're bringing into the military pugil stick fighting, um, so that they could become better with the bayonet. So to me, all that is linked with the spear, right? So okay, I'm talking about the spear. In my you know lineage, you being Japanese, we revere the sword, and why is that? In Japan, it's all about the sword, right? Whereas in Chinese, they have tons of swords and they appreciate the sword very much, but still, the king was the spear, right? Why is that? My guess, right? My guess, I can only speculate, is that in Japan, they had war just like in the the Chinese Three Kingdoms War and stuff. there were feudal times in Japan, very famous, with samurais battling it out to become shogun. But I think a lot of times areas were conquered. So we're talking about actual, like civilization, actual villages, towns. So aside from war, so in war, spear is necessary, and I believe it shines big time. But when we're talking about more modern, closer to modern day towns, right? I mean, it's still ancient what I'm talking about, but still, you know, compared to like the battlefield, this is a lot closer to what we have today. The majority of today, which is, cities and villages and stuff like that. So in that kind of lifestyle, and, and I'm not talking about like just running from battlefield to battlefield, hiding in caves, not that kind of lifestyle. This is very different. So in this kind of lifestyle, a spear is cumbersome. Spear gets in the way. A sword you could sleep with. A sword you could walk around with, kind of like in the Wild Wild West, where they had the cult, right? They literally gunslingers. They had the firearm on a sling on their hip, and probably every time they went into town, they had that, right? That kind of thing. So if you think of it that way, I think that was a transition. So it's not necessarily that the sword is the superior weapon. I believe it was more that the sword was closer to the individual and the spear was in the closet, or it was put away until wartime came. So until then, you didn't really see the spear. But on a daily basis, they're walking around with the katana sword, right? So that's what I think. So even in Japanese culture, if you look at it that way, then the spear cannot be ignored. And when I went to Japan this time around this year, um, recently, my recent Japan trip, I got to talk to some amazing martial artists about the spear, about Filipino martial arts. Um, of course, they saw me as the Filipino martial arts expert, even though some of them had the background. They have Filipino martial arts background different from mine. Um, and actually, they studied my material, but they also have their own training and stuff that they did before they discovered my YouTube channel and stuff. But anyway, we talked about how the sword is basically just a shorter spear, and the knife is just a shorter sword. And then when we go to bare hand, we can still use techniques, not in sport competition, but we can still use techniques that mimic the spear movement, and that exists in Chinese martial arts to this day. Some of the styles, when they're throwing punches and stuff, it comes from that, direct from the spear. So they train with the spear and then they go empty hand, and the movement is the same. And we see that in karate, that kind of thing, where they're doing stuff with a weapon and then they go to empty hand, and it's the same, right? So obviously we see that in Filipino martial arts too. And Filipino martial arts maybe perhaps a little bit more vocal about that than the other styles, but we definitely see it in Japanese martial arts, Korean martial arts, and Chinese martial arts. Obviously, all three influence each other. More so, I would say Chinese martial arts has influenced Korean and Japanese, but you know that's totally there. So to me, it still all goes back to the spear, right? So then, the spear primarily is going to be a stabbing weapon, right? And I would have to say that, okay, so the spear, the way they use it in Europe, the way they use it in China, I mean, we're both human beings, so there's going to be similarities, right? there's definitely going to be similarities. Basics are probably going to be almost identical in many ways, probably, right? I'm not a spear person, so I can't say, but I'm just guessing. There's going to be a lot of similarities, especially in the basics. So a stabbing weapon, right? And then goes the question in Filipino martial arts: how come? Why is there the transition from stabbing to slashing? And Professor Bram Frank, who is from my lineage. No, that sounds wrong. It's more accurate if I say the lineage that he's in, I was also a part of. Okay, that's more accurate. Okay, so it's the same lineage line, but he has said that a blade edge. What makes it special is that it is its ability to cut, to slash, to slice and dice, whereas stabbing is all you need is a point. You don't need an edge necessarily. Yes, an edge is going to help, but really it's just for puncturing, right? To stab. So you don't need the edge. The edge is more high tech. So in that sense, if you use a blade edge and you just use it for stabbing, then you're not making the most of the blade edge. So from that point of view, I completely understand why he's saying what he's saying, and in the Filipino martial arts, why they're doing blade edge stuff, which is slashing. If you're gonna take full advantage of the edge, it's a slash. It's not a stab. Stab you could do with scissors. Stab you could do with freaking chopsticks, or a pen or a screwdriver. You don't need an edge, right? So in that sense, you are using this specialized weapon. Another example I could give you guys to help you understand what I'm trying to say better is, like, for example, a karambit. Okay, in Filipino martial arts, how do we use a karambit? Well, the first level is to ignore that it is a karambit. You treat it as a normal knife. You just completely ignore that it has the loop, it has this curved tiger's claw blade. You ignore that. And just hold it normal, like a normal knife, and use it like a normal knife. And you can. Maybe a little bit of adjustment in the angle when you're stabbing, but other than that, I mean, you're going to see that it's going to slash very well, but it's more like ripping, tearing. So that's the first idea, right? But if you are going to use the karambit to its maximum efficiency, to where the karambit is specifically designed that a normal knife can't compete with a karambit, then you're going to start seeing it being used, like, for example, in the reverse grip. You're going to start seeing it, used with the loop, with the actual curvature. So you go in deep and much closer to the opponent than with a normal knife, right? You're going to start seeing stuff like that. The ability to grab with the karambit. You're going to see stuff like that. Specialized things that the normal knife can't do. And that's using the karambit properly, right? Using the karambit the way it was meant to be used. So that's the same idea to me in Filipino martial arts, what Professor Bram Frank is saying. If you're going to use a knife, or if you're going to use a bladed weapon, you use the edge, because that's what it was meant for, and to use it as, yes, it can stab, but to use it primarily for stabbing, then why even bother? Well, you could downgrade once again to just like scissors, a pointy scissor, screwdriver. You could downgrade to that and you'll be just fine, because that's all you're using it for, stabbing and poking, right? So I understand that argument 100%. I get that. But I think there's another layer that hasn't really been mentioned about Filipino martial arts. And that is, in combat, the spear's the king. Okay, I understand that, right? But now it starts becoming like, okay, when you shorten the weapon, it becomes easier to wield. Okay, and it becomes lighter. Okay, so now we could make it all metal, and that's where the sword comes in, right? So they're doing stuff like that. Okay, I understand that. But still, the basic usage of even a knife, even empty hand, would be a straight line thrusting attack, as in punching, right? That would be your most basic attack. But then, to counter that, to go up against someone that's going to do that, because the other person's going to do that too, right? I mean, that's the most basic. So that's what you got to expect. That's what's going to be coming at you, is this thrusting spear type of attack. Okay. Then the slashing really comes in. So the way that I want to see it is, if you look at Muay Thai kickboxing, which is one of the most, a lot of people consider, as far as stand-up striking goes, it's one of the most effective styles on the planet. It's been proven itself many, many times over. Muay Thai kickboxing is super effective, right? So when you look at Muay Thai kickboxing, that to me is kind of like Filipino martial arts in a sense, that it is designed to counter that straight attack coming in. So a lot of their attacks are rounded. It's not straight. It comes from around, like their roundhouse kick, and even their punches and stuff. They go from a punch into a head grab. It comes from around. It's not necessarily straight in. So that tells me that they're one step ahead of the straight line attacker. They've evolved one step ahead, and that's why they're so effective. The second step, this may be the level change, and that's where you get your grappling. That's the next evolution. But other than that, which the Muay Thai fighter is not trained for, and they're not really equipped to handle that level change, double leg takedown, tackle, grappling, full-blown grappling type situation, they are equipped to handle, and the way their stance is, everything is equipped to handle that straight incoming attack. And I feel like in Filipino martial arts, it's the same idea. We're expecting the person to come in straight, and we're going to counter that by going off to the side, going off to the angles, and then the slashing coming in. So I believe if you're going to use Filipino martial arts effectively, you want to use it that way. If not, you got to revert back to more of the spear usage right here. Because at the end of the day, if someone does this and you're thinking you could just go head to head using Filipino martial arts, and I'm not saying spear versus double sticks, but what I'm saying is someone that comes in straight line like a spear, and you're thinking with Filipino martial arts you could handle that. No, I don't think so. Then you're misunderstanding what Filipino martial arts is. It's how would I explain it? Like a Muay Thai kickboxer trying to do karate. Where the more straight line, linear attacks of karate. That's what they're trying to do. They're not going to win that. That's not what Muay Thai is, in my opinion. And yes, I am making this very, very generalized, but I think I do have a point here. And I'm not saying I'm right, but hopefully it is an interesting enough point that might influence the way you're training right now. So that's it for now. Thank you for listening, and take care, folks.